I didn't actually see any of that footage till later. My mom saw it. She immediately started crying.
Even before the fight began, Randy knew this was going to be different from anything he'd ever experienced.
When you hear the cage door close behind you and I look across the ring and here's a 300-pound guy with his shirt off and tattoos all over his body and he's standing there with his arms out, I wasn't sure if I wanted to pee myself or climb the cage or what I wanted to do.
What he did was leave Atlanta a winner. It took Couture less than 1 minute to submit Halma in a rear naked choke. He had found a new career. And shortly after, a new wife. That summer, he and Tricia married. Randy's personal and professional life was suddenly back on track. A series of MMA bouts followed with Randy always positioned as the underdog. Each time, however, he stunned the promoters and fighters with upset wins. He was dubbed the Natural.
Randy's first UFC bouts were pretty much total destruction. He went in there and just annihilated his opponents.
Randy's back-to-back victories got fans talking and earned Randy a shot at Vitor Belfort. An accomplished striker and black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the 19-year-old Belfort was MMA royalty. Those in the know gave Randy little chance against the fighter fans called the Phenom.
Everybody thought Vitor was going to destroy Randy. This was at a time when Vitor was like indestructible, unbeatable.
But once again, everyone was wrong. 8 minutes into the fight, Randy dismantled Belfort with a series of uppercuts.
Vitor Belfort was one of the most talented guys I ever faced. And so to come through victorious was one of the most special fights in my career.
Even though his opponents were younger, stronger, and faster, Randy's will to win had more than made up for it.
I think that set up the stage and the tone and tempo for the rest of my career, that particular fight.
He uses his smarts to make up for anywhere where physically he might be coming up short. He finds a way to make people fight his fight.
7 months after first stepping into the cage, an undefeated Randy Couture beat champion kickboxer Maurice Smith to win the UFC heavyweight title. But rather than celebrating his victory, he found himself in a fight with UFC's management.
I had a contract that said they were going to pay me a certain amount for a fight, and they came back and said, look, we can't pay you that much. We'll pay you. They offered me less than a third.
The organization itself was backpedaling as it confronted its image of human cockfighting, turning off everyone from journalists to promoters to legislators.
The sport was having a very difficult time in the United States. It was dropped from pay-per-view in a lot of states. It was banned from a lot of states. It was getting a lot of negative attention in the United States.
In Japan, however, MMA rivaled sumo and baseball as national pastimes. Randy vacated his UFC title without defending it and headed east.
Mixed martial arts continues to be huge in Japan. They certainly look at mixed martial arts and put it on a very high ground.
Randy said, hey, I have to feed my family. This is what I want to do for a living. So he decided to go compete in Japan.
Against the top flight competition in Japan, Randy experienced his first defeats. But he was perfecting his MMA fighting techniques and earning a reputation as a fearsome competitor. Despite his successful mixed martial arts career, Randy couldn't shake his Olympic dreams. At 37 years old, Randy again set his sights on wrestling in the Olympics.
I went back to spending the next year and a half basically just focused on wrestling, trying to make that 2000 Olympic team. I figured that was going to be my last chance to kind of achieve that Olympic status and win a medal.
Randy poured his heart and soul into preparing for the Olympic trials. At the trials, Randy again fought well, but again, it wasn't enough. For the 4th time, he was named an Olympic alternate.
It could have been a very low point in his life, but the one thing I think people are starting to learn about Randy is his determination. I don't think he lets anything get him down. He just keeps going, keeps bouncing back.
Had I made that Olympic team, even in 2000, I might have been satisfied. I might have been, okay to kind of rest and just say, oh, yeah, that's what I wanted, and I wouldn't have been as hungry to then pursue fighting the way I have.
With his Olympic dreams dashed for all times, in the spring of 2000, Randy returned to MMA more determined than ever. On November 17, 2000, Randy stepped back into the cage to reclaim the title he had vacated 3 years earlier. His opponent was another former All-American wrestler and UFC heavyweight champion, Kevin the Monster Randleman.
And I had never faced another wrestler who could potentially put me there on my back, and Kevin was the first guy.
Randleman dominated the first 2 rounds, but 4:13 into the 3rd round, Couture TKO'd Randleman with a series of brutal strikes in the corner of the cage.
I'd spent time surviving in those first 2 rounds, and he didn't make it out of the 3rd.
He fought Kevin Randleman, and he won the UFC title again for the 2nd time.
At age 37, Randy Couture became the first 2-time title holder in UFC heavyweight history. But his growing distrust and frustration with the UFC would soon place him in the midst of professional and personal turmoil.
And I hoped to be able to go out on top.
In 2000, 37-year-old fighter Randy Couture was at the top of his game. Despite missing the cut for the Olympic wrestling team for the 4th time, Randy's prowess as a mixed martial arts fighter made him the first 2-time champion in UFC heavyweight history.
He saw those Olympic failures as motivation that he wouldn't have had to do the UFC at the level he's doing it. So maybe it's the best thing that happened to him.
But UFC's new management was looking to change its image and promote younger fighters. Fighters like Randy's next opponent, 27-year-old Golden Boy Pedro the Rock Izzo.
Randy was the underdog coming into UFC 31 against Pedro Izzo, primarily because Izzo had won 11 of his last 12 fights, had stopped 10 opponents. So he was a great striker. He was known to have good takedown defense.
On May 4th, 2001, fight fans in Atlantic City witnessed one of the greatest cage battles in mixed martial arts history. Izzo the striker against Couture the grappler.
He dominated Pedro in the 1st round, almost put him out of the fight, and then in the 2nd round, Pedro turned the page on him and almost put Randy out of the fight, and it was a 5-round war that I think he took as much abuse in that fight as he took in any fight.
He kicked me 13 times in my lead leg, and my leg turned black and swelled up. I didn't walk right for 3 weeks after that fight.
Though Randy won by unanimous decision, it was clear no one at UFC was pleased with the outcome of the fight.
The UFC didn't want Randy as their champion. They were looking to get Randy beat, and the UFC had invested a lot of money into Pedro Izzo. They'd signed him to a very long-term deal.
Less than 6 months after the fight, the UFC demanded Couture give Izzo a rematch.
I just had the sense that I was being counted out. That, okay, here's this 37-year-old athlete that's our heavyweight champion. He's over the hill.
For their 2nd fight, Couture entered the cage as the underdog, and again, he dominated. Izzo's trademark sidekicks proved futile against Couture's masterful takedowns and vicious ground and pound techniques.
Couture, in the 3rd round, basically was on top of him, dragged him towards the cage wall, and unleashed a furious assault on him to the point where the referee had to pull him off.
He destroyed Pedro. The 2nd time he fought him, he beat him easily.
If the league was trying to derail him, they were failing miserably.
I just think they would have been happy if I'd lost, and they wouldn't have had to deal with me.
Randy's victory cemented him as the undisputed UFC heavyweight champ. And to the consternation of league officials, he was more popular than ever among a growing legion of fans. A seemingly unbeatable champ.
I think his special appeal to the fans is that he's so real. I mean, the guy is so humble, so classy. He doesn't put on this big persona, this big attitude. He's just like an everyday guy.
Fights with ever larger opponents followed.
Do your thing, man.
Opponents like 256-pound Josh Barnett, aka the baby-faced assassin. The 24-year-old Barnett outweighed Randy by 40 pounds. he managed to stop Randy with a TKO in the second round.
I lost my first fight in the UFC. I lost to Josh Barnett, and then there was some controversy with